you should sometimes. Environmental conservation. Now, since we're on the topic of Shastras, let me first ask you a question. Well, let me first emphasize how highly environmental conservation was as an important ideal. From that, I'm going to ask you one question. Who here has read or watched, or a combination of the sort, the Ramayana? Raise your hand. Raise your hand with pride, please. Thank you. Okay. For those of you who have, I'm not going to summarize or discuss in detail what it is, because that's kind of your job. But I will be giving one reference on the topic here today of environmental conservation. In the huge epic of Ramayana, there was a war. And the main hero of the story, Ram, he was like the commander-in-chief of the Varnara. He was going up against Ravan. And during the war, a lot of Ram's troops, one day, they were injured. They were lying down, and Ram needed medicine to help them. So what does he do? He goes to his helpful friend, Hanuman. He says, hey Hanuman, look, I need you to get me something. I need you to get me medicine. So Hanuman goes all the way up to the Himalaya, the mountains, and grabs medicine, but Hanuman can't differentiate between this medicine and that medicine. He just shows up into a huge, gigantic aisle with so many different medicines. He's very confused, right? So, not wasting any more time, he brings back the entire mountain, okay? And keep in mind, this was taking place during the war. This is, of course, what people mostly know. The aspect that I'm going to be talking about, tying in with environmental conservation, is something that people don't normally pay attention to, probably because it was not highly emphasized. The aspect is that on the same night, after the medicine was delivered, Ram says, hey Hanuman, look, you gotta take the medicine back. And this was highly important because the medicine, everyone in India at that time knew where the medicine was. If Hanuman were to just leave the medicine mountain over there where he brought it, then it would be relocated and people would be confused where to find it. So, to preserve that environment and to make sure everyone knew where the medicine was, he had to take it back, right? I mean, doesn't that make sense? And coming back to the idea of the war, keep in mind, this was all taking place during the war. Now, the war that was going on during the Ramayana, it's not just any kind of war. Most today, you got a lot of wars which are political, political types of wars, like, for example, the war on terrorism, or the war in the Middle East, Vietnamese war, etc., etc. All of which are political wars in a sense. Granted, some are more complex than others, but nevertheless, they're all political wars. Now, I'm not going to go into politics here. No, I'll leave that up to you guys. However, this war that was in the Ramayana, it was not a political war. It was a humanity war. That is the huge difference. It was a humanity war. And perhaps some politics may have been involved, but that's not the important part. It was a humanities war. It was a war on ethics. More specifically, the war was on the justice and respect and social values of women in society. That was the whole purpose of the war in Ramayana. Now, and speaking of which, since this was a humanities war, it was a war that could not be lost, okay? If you lose a political war, yeah, there will be some loss, but a humanities war, that's a big no. You cannot lose that. To give you an example of what I'm talking about, let me give you an example here. Pretend you're walking down the street, you have $1,000 in your pocket, okay? For some reason. Don't carry $1,000, that's a bad idea, but let's pretend you have $1,000 in your pocket. And you're walking down the street, and out of nowhere, a robber comes up, and he robs you at gunpoint. You just lost $1,000. Okay, putting that aside, let's pretend you are a student now. Okay, you go to this university, take your pick, doesn't matter. You go to this university, and the tuition fee is also $1,000. Okay? You go to the university, you do the work, you work hard, and you take the test, and you pass it with flying colors. Good job. All right, but then for some reason, the university says, oh, we screwed up on your test score, so you're going to have to completely do the entire semester again. You have to pay us another $1,000. Bringing these two examples together, you lost $1,000 in both situations. Okay? With the robber example, technically it would have been okay for you to lose $1,000, because other than that, you would have also been killed in the process. But then again, you shouldn't have been carrying $1,000 to begin with, right? But coming back to the idea of the university example, you worked hard. You did everything that you need to do to earn that grade, and yet you were denied that. That itself is something you cannot lose. That $1,000 you lost towards the university, that is unacceptable, okay? And that's the huge difference between a political war and a humanity war, okay? So keep in mind, coming back to the idea of the Ramayana example I just gave you a couple moments ago, keeping that in mind, even though the war was very, very important at the time, and that Ram could not lose the war, he still valued human environmental conservation above all else, whether or not the result of the war was going to be good or bad. And this implies that the importance of environmental conservation was higher above all else. Now, this is different from priorities that we set today a lot of the time. You know, sometimes you worry about the economy, next meal, or financial security, or etc., etc. Everyday things, right? Now, I'm not going to say that you all are carefree about the environment. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. But there are times where people in society, including us, because we've also done it too at times, people in society do not care about the environment as much as they should. That is what I'm trying to emphasize here today. And let me give you an example of what I'm talking about here. I go to this university called UGA, University of Georgia. It's a very nice school. And in this university, you have many different dining commons around the campus, where all students, like myself, go to eat. Okay? And more times I observe than not. More times I observe more than I should. People fill up their plates with food more than they will actually consume. More. And this makes me wonder, why would they put more food on their plate than they're actually going to consume? You know, some of that food is actually going to go to waste. Some of that food which other people could eat is actually going to waste. And on the same token, I sometimes also see it here. You know, when I'm done with Arya, I also go to the next building. I eat over there and I finish up all my food on my plate. But when I go over to the trash, sometimes I see some food left over in the trash, and I notice, why? Why would food be just thrown to waste? It could be food that other people could eat, but yet it's being wasted. The reasons, I don't know, but nevertheless, I see it there. And this is different, and this is what sets our time apart from Vedic God, apart from Vedic time. This shows that our society, at the time, does not value environmental conservation as much as it used to. You know, during the time of the Rishis, the environmental conservation was valued a lot more than we do in our daily lives. And speaking of which, since we are on the topic of environmental conservation, now let me address another topic. Greed. Okay? Now, whether we all admit it or not, we have also been greedy in some way, at least once in our lives, right? Except me. No, I'm perfect. I'm not greedy. I'm just kidding. I've been greedy at least once or twice, a couple times in my life too. And with that, I'm going to talk about bringing this in with environmental conservation. In one example, there's an example in the Mahabharata where Krishna and Sudama, they were going to the forest and collecting like wood off the ground for their yajna, for their daily activities. And they had a choice at that moment. They could collect dry wood, or they could collect fresh wood from the trees. They collected dry wood. This shows that they collected only what they needed, because all they needed was simply dry wood. They didn't need to collect fresh wood from the trees. They only collected what was from the ground. And at the same token, they did not stock up on excess supplies. They didn't stock up on days or for weeks or any of that. They only collected as much as they needed. Okay? And with that, sometimes people do stock up on things for good reason in today's society, but back then they didn't. And this is just showing how highly environmental conservation was back then. With that, and just like before, this was what sets us apart from Vedic. Because of Vedic, people did not take excess of what they needed. They only took what they needed back then. And on that same matter, we at times, as members of society, sometimes take more from nature than what we need. Take paper, for example. This society, we consume a lot of paper in 1 year. How much? I don't know. Okay. How much does humankind consume in 1 year? I don't know. But it's a lot, I can tell you that much. Okay? And I realized this, so trying to be environmentally conservative, I tried not to consume so much paper. Take this set of papers, for example. All of this is recycled paper. I tried to conserve paper, and it also helps with being environmentally friendly. You can also do it too. It helps. Think of how much paper you'll be saving. This is just one example. And there are many other examples, but this is just one. Okay? Moving on. Speaking of which, of taking more from the environment, let me give you another example from the Mahabharata. In the Mahabharata, you go to the point where Yudhishthir and his brothers, they were going to the forest and living there for 12 years or so on and so forth. They were living in one box because they lost a bet towards duty of God. And two of Yudhishthir's brothers, Nakul and Sahadev, they were very, very angry. They were taking their rage out on nature. They were chopping up more wood than they needed. Yudhishthir saw this and said, "Why are you chopping up so much wood?" And Nakul and Sahadev said, "We're so angry. We want to take our anger on Duryodhana, but we can't. So we're taking it out on these trees, and we're cutting down more than what we need." Yudhishthir saw this and said, "Don't cut down on more what we need. If you chop down the entire forest, we won't have a forest then. We won't be able to grow more wood. We'll just stop the supply of wood then." And this is what is emphasized in environmental conservation within our Shastras. Coming back to the idea of taking more than what we need. In the same sense, the basic bottom line is what I'm trying to say. The more we take, the more waste we produce. And the more we have, then the more we have to deal with to manage all that waste. Doesn't it make sense that if we waste less, then we have less waste to work with and less hassle? Doesn't that make sense, right? And coming back to the topic of the Shastras, there are many famous figures who put this concept into practice. Okay, let me give you another example of how highly this ideal was practiced. Given that I just gave you an example from the Mahabharata, it was Yudhishthir. That was a famous figure who practiced this. Okay? Now, I'll give you another example, but before I do, let me emphasize one thing. If you notice, all the examples I gave you, they weren't from the Vedas. None of them were. Okay? Granted, I could give you examples from the Vedas, but I won't, because that would take a very, very long time. If I were to give you all of them, then it'll take hours, days, weeks, and etc., etc. It'll take a very long time, and I certainly do not have that much time. I also notice I'm running a little short on time too. But let me wrap up this discourse with the two last topics. The first is, about 2,600 years ago, Samrat Ashok, a great emperor, he was very famous because he built a lake and canals. Okay, he did this to aid agriculture at the local level. He did this also while preserving the landscape and the forest. That's the important part. But nevertheless, he did this. In fact, you could also observe his accomplishments if you go to near Junagadh in Saurashtra, Gujarat, India. You could still observe his monuments. They're still there today. But nevertheless, this shows that environmental conservation was still valued all the way back then. And when taking into account the entire span of human history, that is quite recent. I mean, 2,600 years, that's quite recent. This shows that environmental conservation was happening all the way at the time from Vedic, during Vedic time, all the way to the time of Ramayana, all the way to the time of Mahabharata, and all the way until 2,600 years ago. This shows how highly practiced that environmental conservation was. Alright, so the last topic I'll be discussing today here is a topic about the Shastras here, and tying in with the environmental conservation. Coming back to the Shastras, along with the four Vedas, there's one other book that you may or you may not have observed or heard of. It's the Ayurveda. This is the great book of health or medicinal science, and in it, Lord Dhanvantari, he talks about various plants, medicinal plants in other words. He labels them as Aushadhi Vanaspati, okay? And he talks about how some of these plants, all these plants in fact, certain ones grow in certain locations on this planet, okay? Some grow in high altitudes, some grow underwater, some grow in light, some grow in dark, and etc., etc. You know? Each one of them grows in a specific location. But nevertheless, Lord Dhanvantari strictly emphasized that each aushadhi, each medicinal plant, grows in its natural habitat. Okay? Just like aushadhi, we too somewhat have a natural habitat. We live in certain areas, right? We live over here in this part of the globe. We would not exactly be comfortable if we were to be relocated all the way to the North Pole. No. Most of us would not be comfortable. It'd be very, very cold up there. Just like that, the plants, the medicinal plants, would not feel comfortable. And doing so, if we keep messing with the environment like that, then a lot of these medicinal plants would go to waste. They would die off. And that's not good because some of them produce certain medicines that are very, very rare to find. Okay? And this is what I'm trying to emphasize. Likewise, in many aushadhis, we too also have to preserve the environment. You know? Because the aushadhis, they produce the medicine that we can use. So it's best that we help them to stay in their natural environment. And this is the important message that I'm trying to convey from all this. Preserve the environment and take only what is necessary. Okay? Because our forefathers have done it as a tradition. And it is mankind's job to do it periodically. Our job to do it periodically. Thank you. Next time, whenever that comes, I'm not going to give you a date because I don't know. Next time I'll be discussing how our rishis were not just environmental conservatists, because they were also scientists. I will discuss that next time. Thank you.